Harvest season doesn't care about your pride. It doesn't care about your dealer relationships, your handshake agreements, or how many years you've been loyal to a brand. When a critical part breaks in the middle of September, you have maybe 72 hours before you lose a year's worth of income. That's when you find out what your dealer really thinks of you. And that's exactly when Tom Holbrook learned that his decision to buy a Massey Ferguson 8740 had made him invisible. Not officially blacklisted, nothing in writing, no phone call saying he wasn't welcome anymore. Just a quiet, deliberate shift in priority. When he called the dealership, the same dealership he'd been buying parts from for 20 years, they told him they'd get to it when they could. 2 weeks, maybe 3. We're pretty backed up. His neighbor's John Deere got serviced same day, because his neighbor was still loyal. Tom Holbrook had farmed 1,800 acres in southern Illinois for most of his adult life. His father had worked the same ground before him. The Holbrook name carried weight in the county, not because they were rich, but because they were consistent. They paid their bills. They showed up. They didn't complain. And they bought John Deere. Always had. Tom's first tractor had been a 4440 his father bought used in 1991. Solid machine, ran forever. When it finally gave out, Tom replaced it with a 7810, then an 8320, then an 8345R. Every 5 to 7 years, a new Deere, same dealership every time. Klein Ag Equipment, just outside of Waterloo. The owner, Ray Klein, knew Tom by name, knew his father, knew his kids. When Tom walked into the parts department, the guys didn't even ask for his account number. They just pulled it up. That kind of relationship wasn't built overnight. It was decades of trust, handshake deals, and unspoken loyalty. But in 2019, something shifted. Tom started looking at numbers differently. Not emotionally, not based on legacy or brand loyalty, just cold, hard operating cost. He'd been running his 8345R hard for 4 seasons, and it was starting to show wear. Nothing catastrophic, but enough to know he'd need a replacement soon. He started doing what he always did, comparing models, talking to Ray, figuring out financing. But this time, he also looked at Massey Ferguson. Not because he wanted to, not because he was unhappy with Deere. He just saw a spec sheet for the MF 8740 and couldn't ignore it. 370 horsepower, ridiculous torque curve, fuel efficiency numbers that didn't make sense until he ran them 3 times, and a price tag that was $45,000 less than the comparable Deere. He mentioned it to Ray one afternoon, casually, just floating the idea. Ray didn't even look up from his desk. "You don't want a Massey, Tom." "Why not?" "Because when it breaks, you're going to be waiting. We don't stock parts for those. We don't prioritize service for them. You'll be sitting in your field while everyone else is running." It wasn't a threat. It was a warning. And at the time, Tom took it seriously. He almost didn't buy the Massey Ferguson. Almost. But then he ran the numbers again. He thought about what $45,000 could do. New grain bin, pay down some land debt, maybe even take a year off worrying about margins. And the performance specs weren't just competitive. They were better. More torque at lower RPMs, better fuel economy under load, a transmission that didn't fight him in the mud. So in February 2020, Tom Holbrook drove 2 hours south to a Massey Ferguson dealership in Effingham and bought the 8740. Paid cash, didn't finance through Klein. Didn't even tell Ray he was doing it. He just did it. The tractor showed up on a flatbed a week later. Tom unloaded it himself, parked it in the shed next to his 8345R, and didn't say a word to anyone. He figured it wasn't anyone's business. It was his farm, his money, his decision. But in a small farm community, nothing stays quiet. Ray found out within 48 hours. Tom didn't get a phone call, didn't get a confrontation, just a cold silence. The next time he stopped by Klein Ag for a hydraulic hose, the counter guy was polite but distant. No small talk. No how's the family, just the part, the receipt, and a nod. Tom didn't think much of it. People get busy, dealerships have off days. But then planting season started. Tom ran the Massey Ferguson hard that spring, pulled a 16-row planter through 1 to 1,800 acres in under 2 weeks. The machine was flawless, smooth power delivery, no wheel slip. Fuel consumption was 20% lower than his Deere had been on the same ground. He started to feel like he'd made the right call. until the hydraulic pump on his grain cart started leaking. It wasn't the Massey Ferguson. It was an older piece of equipment he'd been running for years. But the pump was shot, and he needed a replacement fast. He called Kleinag. "Yeah, we can get that for you. Probably 4 or 5 days." 4 or 5 days wasn't great, but it was manageable. Tom said fine, ordered the part, and figured he'd work around it. A week later, the part still hadn't come in. He called back. "Oh yeah, sorry, Tom. Supplier pushed it back. Maybe another week. 2 weeks total now." That was pushing it, but Tom stayed calm. He asked if there was any way to expedite it. "We'll see what we can do." They didn't do anything. 3 weeks later, the part finally arrived. By then, Tom had borrowed a grain cart from a neighbor just to keep moving. When he picked up the pump, the guy at the counter didn't apologize, didn't explain the delay, just handed him the part and rang him up. Tom started to realize this wasn't an accident. Summer came. The Massey Ferguson kept running. Tom started pulling a 12-bottom plow with it, prepping ground for fall. The machine handled it like it was nothing. He'd never had a tractor with that kind of low-end torque. It didn't labor, didn't strain, just pulled. But every time he needed something from Klein Ag, a filter, a hose, a bearing, the story was the same. "We'll get it ordered. Should be here next week. Suppliers backed up." Meanwhile, his neighbor, the guy running the John Deere 8370R, was getting same-day service. Tom saw it happen. Saw the Klein Ag service truck pull into the guy's yard on a Saturday morning to replace a busted hydraulic line. Saw the technician out there for 2 hours, getting the machine back online before dark. Tom didn't get that. When he called for service, he got voicemail. When he left a message, he got a callback 2 days later. When he asked for a technician to come out, he got, "We're pretty slammed right now. Might be a couple weeks." It was deliberate, subtle, but unmistakable. Ray Klein wasn't punishing him with words, he was punishing him with time. Then September hit, harvest season, the one time of year where every hour matters. Tom fired up the Massey Ferguson, hooked up his combine, and started cutting corn. The 8740 was pulling a 12-row head through 200-bushel corn like it was designed for it. No bog, no slip, just steady, relentless power. He got through 600 acres in the first week, and then on a Thursday afternoon, the PTO shaft on his grain auger snapped. Not the tractor, not the Massey Ferguson. The auger, a 15-year-old Westfield that had been running since his father's time, but the PTO shaft was done. Twisted metal. No way to run it without a replacement. Tom called Klein Ag. "Hey, I need a PTO shaft for a Westfield auger. Fast. Let me check stock. Pause. We don't have that in stock. We can order it. How long?" 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Tom felt his chest tighten. 2 weeks. It's harvest season. "I know, but we're backed up. A lot of guys need parts right now." Tom knew what that meant. A lot of loyal guys. Guys who bought Deere. Guys who mattered. He hung up and called 3 other suppliers. None of them had it in stock either. The only place that could get it fast was a farm supply store 2 hours away, and they wanted $400 more than Klein's price. He paid it anyway. Drove 4 hours round trip, picked up the part himself, installed it in his shop at 11 p.m. under floodlights, got back in the field the next morning. But he'd lost a day and a half. In September, that's 150 acres. That's $30,000 in potential income if the weather turned. And the whole time, he kept thinking about his neighbor, the guy with the deer, the guy who got same-day service. Tom didn't say anything. He kept his head down and kept cutting. But the anger was building. Not at the machine. The Massey Ferguson was doing exactly what it was supposed to do. It was outperforming every expectation. Better fuel economy, better traction, better power under load. But none of that mattered when he couldn't get parts. 3 days later, a hydraulic line on the combine blew. Not a Massey Ferguson issue, just a combine wearing out. But Tom needed a replacement hose fast. He called Klein Ag again. "Yeah, we can get that. Probably a week. I need it today. We don't have it in stock. Can you expedite it? We'll see what we can do." They didn't. Tom ended up buying the hose from a Napa auto parts store, cutting it to length himself, and crimping the fittings in his shop. It worked, but it took 6 hours. 6 hours he didn't have. Meanwhile, his neighbor's John Deere had a transmission issue. Klein Ag sent a technician out that same afternoon, had it diagnosed and fixed by the next morning. Tom watched the service truck drive past his farm, didn't even slow down. By the end of September, Tom had finished his harvest. The Massey Ferguson had pulled every acre without a single breakdown. 1,800 acres. Not one mechanical failure. The fuel savings alone had paid for 2 months of operating cost. But Tom was exhausted, not from the work, from fighting the system. Every part he needed took twice as long. Every service call got delayed. Every time he walked into Klein Ag, he felt the coldness. The guys behind the counter were polite but distant. No one asked how the Massey was running. No one offered advice. No one treated him like he mattered, because to them, he didn't anymore. He'd broken the unspoken rule. You buy from us, we take care of you. You don't, you're on your own. Tom started sourcing parts online, started learning how to do his own repairs, started calling suppliers 3 states away just to avoid dealing with Klein Ag. It was more work, more stress, more time. But he didn't have a choice. One afternoon in late October, Tom ran into Ray Klein at the co-op. They hadn't spoken since before Tom bought the Massey Ferguson. Ray was loading seed into his truck. Tom was picking up some chemical. They made eye contact. Ray nodded, didn't smile, didn't say a word. Tom nodded back. That was it. No confrontation, no argument, just a silent acknowledgement that their relationship was over. Tom walked back to his truck, sat in the driver's seat, and stared out at the road for a long time. He thought about his father, about the 30 years of loyalty to Klein Ag, about all the handshakes, the favors, the trust, about how quickly that could disappear when you made one decision that didn't fit the script. And he thought about the Massey Ferguson, sitting in his shed, still running, still flawless. Was it worth it? Winter came. Tom kept running his operation, but the isolation was real. Other farmers in the area still bought from Klein, still got priority service, still got the dealership's attention. Tom was outside that circle now. He started noticing things, small things. When he'd show up at the co-op, conversations would stop. Not dramatically, just a subtle shift. Guys who used to ask his opinion on seed varieties or chemical programs stopped asking. Not because they were angry, just because he wasn't part of the same system anymore. He'd chosen differently, and in a small farming community, that mattered. The talk started quietly, at the grain elevator, at the diner on Main Street. Guys would mention Tom's name, then pause. Someone would say, yeah, he went with a Massey. And that was enough. No one said he'd made a mistake. No one openly criticized him. But the implication was there. He'd broken ranks. Tom heard about it secondhand. His wife mentioned that Linda Morrison had said something at church. Nothing mean, just a comment about how Tom must be doing his own maintenance now. It wasn't said with sympathy. It was said with distance, like he'd moved to another county. But the Massey Ferguson kept running. In the spring of 2021, Tom put another 800 hours on it. Planting, tillage, hauling. The machine didn't complain, didn't break, didn't bog. It just worked. He started doing all his own maintenance, oil changes, filter swaps, greasing. He bought a service manual and learned the hydraulic system inside and out, taught himself how to read diagnostic codes, ordered parts directly from suppliers in Canada when he couldn't find them stateside. He didn't need Klein Ag anymore. Or at least, that's what he told himself. But the truth was harder. He missed the convenience. He missed being able to call someone and get help the same day. He missed walking into a parts department and being recognized. He missed the trust. He'd traded all of that for performance and savings. And most days, he wasn't sure if it was a fair trade. Then in July 2021, something shifted. Tom was at an equipment auction about 40 miles south. He wasn't planning to buy anything, just looking. But he ran into another farmer, a guy named Keith Donovan, who ran about 2,500 acres near Centralia. Keith saw Tom looking at a used Massey Ferguson 7720. You run Massey? Keith asked. Tom nodded. Yeah, 8740. Keith grinned. How's Klein treating you? Tom didn't say anything. Keith laughed. Yeah, same here. I bought an MF 8690 2 years ago. Haven't been able to get a damn part from them since. They talked for 20 minutes, swapped stories. Keith had gone through the exact same thing, same delays, same cold shoulder, same quiet punishment. But Keith had also figured something out. There's a guy in Mount Vernon, runs an independent shop, does all the Massey Ferguson work, Klein won't touch. I've been using him for a year. He's faster, cheaper, and he actually answers the phone. Tom got the guy's number. His name was Dale Richter. Ran a one-man operation out of a shop behind his house. No fancy dealership, no corporate backing, just a guy who knew tractors and didn't care what color they were. 2 weeks later, when a sensor on the Massey's engine threw a code, Tom didn't call Kleinag. He called Dale. Dale showed up the next day, diagnosed it in 20 minutes, had the part on his truck, fixed it on the spot. $200. Done. Tom stood there in his driveway, watching Dale pack up his tools, and realized something. He didn't need Kleinag. He never really had. What he'd needed was reliability, and he'd been confusing that with loyalty. Over the next year, Tom built a new network, Dale for repairs, online suppliers for parts. A guy in Missouri who specialized in Massey Ferguson hydraulics, another farmer in Indiana who ran a parts warehouse out of his barn and could get anything shipped in 48 hours. It wasn't as convenient as having a dealer 5 miles away, but it worked, and the Massey Ferguson kept running. By the fall of 2022, Tom had put 3,000 hours on the 8740. Not a single major breakdown. Regular maintenance, a few sensors, one hydraulic line. That was it. He ran the numbers one afternoon, fuel savings compared to his old Deere, maintenance costs, downtime. Even factoring in the extra time he'd spent sourcing parts and learning to do his own repairs, he was still $60,000 ahead. $60,000. That wasn't nothing, but the cost wasn't just financial. It was social. It was the cold nods at the co-op. It was the conversations that stopped when he walked into the room. It was the knowledge that he'd been quietly erased from the local dealer's priority list. Some guys couldn't handle that. Tom had learned to live with it. One morning in October 2022, Tom was fueling up at the local Casey's. Ray Klein pulled in, driving his usual F-250. They hadn't spoken in over 2 years. Ray got out of his truck, saw Tom, and walked over. "How's that Massey running?" Ray asked. No malice, no sarcasm, just curiosity. Tom looked at him for a moment, then said, "Still running." Ray nodded. "Good." They stood there in silence for a few seconds. Then Ray said, "I wasn't trying to screw you over, right? We built that dealership on relationships. When guys leave, it's hard not to take it personal." Tom didn't say anything. Ray kept going. "But I get it. You did what made sense for your operation. Can't fault a guy for that." Tom nodded. "Yeah." Ray stuck out his hand. Tom shook it. It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. It was just acknowledgement. Two guys who'd been on different sides of the same equation, finally admitting that neither of them had been completely right or completely wrong. Ray got back in his truck and left. Tom stood there for a minute, then climbed into his own truck and drove back to the farm. The Massey Ferguson was sitting in the shed, still covered in dust from yesterday's tillage work. Tom walked over to it, ran his hand along the fender, and thought about everything that had happened since he'd made that decision in February 2020. The delays, the cold shoulders, the quiet punishment, but also the performance, the savings, the independence. He'd lost something when he bought that Massey Ferguson. He'd lost the comfort of being part of the system, the ease of having a dealer who prioritized him, the social acceptance that came with buying what everyone else bought. But he'd gained something too. He'd gained the knowledge that he could run his farm on his own terms, that he didn't need permission from a dealership to make the right decision. That loyalty to a brand meant nothing if the brand didn't serve his operation. And he'd proven that the Massey Ferguson 8740 could do exactly what the spec sheet said it could do. 370 horsepower, unmatched torque, better fuel economy than anything else in its class. 3,000 hours, 0 breakdowns. That wasn't luck. That was engineering. Spring 2023 came around, and Tom started hearing rumors. Klein Ag was losing customers. Not a lot. Just a few. Guys who were tired of the prices, tired of the wait times, tired of being told what they should buy instead of being given options. One of those guys was Tom's neighbor, the one with the John Deere 8370R. Tom saw him at the co-op one morning, and the guy pulled him aside. "I've been thinking about that Massey of yours," the neighbor said. Tom raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? How much you got into it now, hours-wise?" "Little over 3,000. Any problems?" "Not really. Couple sensors. That's it." The neighbor nodded slowly. I'm looking at replacing my A370. Ray's quoting me $390,000 for a new 8R. I ran the numbers on a Massey Ferguson 8S. Comes in at $340,000. Tom didn't say anything. The neighbor kept going. Ray told me I'd regret it, said I'd be waiting on parts, said the resale value would tank. Same thing he told me, Tom said. But you're still running. Yeah. The neighbor stared at the ground for a moment, then looked back at Tom. You think I'd be making a mistake? Tom thought about it. Thought about the last 3 years, the isolation, the frustration, the hours spent tracking down parts and learning to do his own repairs. But he also thought about the $60,000 in savings, the flawless performance, the independence. Depends what you're willing to give up, Tom said. The neighbor nodded. I'll think about it. 2 months later, a Massey Ferguson 8S 265 showed up on the neighbor's farm. Tom saw it from the road, drove past it twice just to make sure he wasn't imagining things. The next day, he got a text from the neighbor. You were right. Ray's not answering my calls anymore. Tom smiled. He texted back, call Dale Richter in Mount Vernon. He'll take care of you. By the summer of 2023, there were 4 Massey Ferguson tractors in the county. Tom's 8740, the neighbor's 8S 265, Keith Donovan's 8690, and a guy named Rick Paulson who'd bought a used 7720 at auction and rebuilt it himself. They started meeting up once a month, shared parts sources, talked maintenance strategies, helped each other troubleshoot issues. It wasn't a formal group, just 4 guys who'd made the same decision and were dealing with the same consequences. But it felt like something. Klein Ag kept running. Ray Klein kept selling John Deeres. Most of the farmers in the area kept buying from him. But the monopoly was cracking. Tom didn't take any satisfaction in that. He wasn't trying to prove a point. He wasn't trying to hurt Ray's business. He just made a decision that worked for his farm. And when other guys saw that it worked, they started making the same decision. That's how change happens. Not through revolution. Through quiet, persistent proof. Fall 2023. Tom fired up the Massey Ferguson for another harvest season. 4 years since he'd bought it. 4,200 hours on the clock. Still running strong. He hooked up the combine and started cutting beans. The 8740 pulled through 180 acres in a day and a half. Smooth, efficient, no drama. Tom finished the harvest in 3 weeks. No breakdowns, no delays, no emergency calls to anyone. He parked the Massey Ferguson in the shed, shut it down, and climbed out of the cab. The machine sat there in the dim light, dust settling on the hood, engine ticking as it cooled. Tom stood there for a minute, just looking at it. 4 years ago, buying this tractor had felt like a gamble, a risk, a decision that might cost him more than money. And it had. It had cost him relationships, convenience, social acceptance, but it had also given him something he didn't know he needed. Freedom. The freedom to make decisions based on performance instead of politics. The freedom to run his farm without needing permission from a dealership. The freedom to prove that loyalty to a brand mattered less than loyalty to his own operation. And after 4,200 hours, the Massey Ferguson 8740 was still proving him right. Tom walked out of the shed, locked the door, and headed back to the house. Tomorrow, he'd start prepping for spring. Another season. Another 1,800 acres. And the Massey Ferguson would be ready. Because at the end of the day, the machine didn't care about dealer politics. It didn't care about who got priority service or who got put last in line. It just worked. And after 4 years of being invisible to the dealership that used to know his name, Tom Holbrook was still farming, still running, still proving that the right machine mattered more than the right handshake.